Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Today we're talking about Pennsylvania's budget impasse, but first we're joined by Angela Columbus, an investigative reporter with Spotlight PA. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Let's consider the headline of a story you filed recently. It reads, Shapiro administration shields key data used to gauge elder abuse system failures. First of all, Angela, just what kind of data are we talking about here?
So the data that I requested through a public records request involved how many older adults are left at risk every year by county by the very county agencies that are supposed to protect them from abuse and neglect. And just a little bit of background for your listeners, there are 52 county area agencies on aging that cover all 67 Pennsylvania counties. And they investigate anytime there is an allegation of abuse or neglect that come in involving an older adult or an adult basically over the age of 60.
When you made your request for records, Angela, how did the Department of Aging respond to this?
So originally they required an extension, an additional 30 days to fulfill the request. And when they came back to me, it was a multi-layered request, but when they came back to me, they denied the portion that had to do with the number of older adults who were left at risk every year. And effectively, they said that that pertains to what is called a non-criminal investigation, which under the Pennsylvania right to know law is exempt from disclosure or information related to these kinds of non-criminal investigations are exempt from disclosure. However, there is an exception to that exemption, and that is when you're talking about aggregate data, like the kind that I requested, that refer to broad categories of people who could not be identified in any way if that data were released. So that I have appealed that to the Office of Open Records, which is currently considering the case and needs to be making a decision by next month.
So far, Angela, what have you been able to find out about older adults at risk due to system failures?
So luckily, through a prior right to know request that I had made with the Department of Aging, I obtained these letters that the department sends out to the county area agencies on aging. And I should back up just a second to explain that the Department of Aging oversees the county area agencies on aging. It monitors them every year for the quality of investigations that they do. And after it conducts its monitoring, it either finds them compliant with the regulations that they have to follow when doing these investigations, or they find them non-compliant. And then after the monitoring, they send a letter to these counties letting them know about the results of the monitoring. So I got those letters through a prior right to know request. And in some years, the department in those letters actually disclosed how many people were left at risk. It was not often, but I did have some data involving the numbers of people at risk.
Angela, your report included the story of a 68-year-old man that showed signs of abuse. What action did investigators take in this case?
It was a complicated case, Larry. It involved a Western Pennsylvania man, and we have not identified him just because of the nature of what happened to him, and also because I was unable to reach his family for consent, which is like what I really like to do in these kinds of situations, given that these records are and details about these investigations are confidential. But what happened was this man, twice somebody called his county area agency on aging to report that they thought that he was being abused by the person who he lived with. The county went out there twice. They deemed his case non-priority, even though as part of the report that was made on him, there was information that there were guns in the house and that the person that he lived with was very aggressive and belittling and likely physically abusing him. And really, there was not much investigative activity beyond the visit, the 2 visits with the older man. And within weeks of these reports, the older man ended up taking his own life.
Well, Angela.
And I was. Go ahead.
Angela, what systemic faults then were found in this situation that might have averted tragedy?
Right. So I contacted a former Department of Aging specialist who has monitored counties in the past. He's now retired from the Department of Aging. And he, in his assessment from day one, he said this older man was left at risk. When the county went out to visit him, the actual aggressor was in the house, which would have put him in a position potentially to be scared to really talk openly and honestly about his situation. His case was deemed a non-priority case, which means that the county did not have to move as quickly to visit him. And just, the idea that there was, in his opinion, no services that were offered on that day. For instance, the county area agency on aging could have said, can we put you in a shelter? Can we offer you some kind of alternative housing? And that never happened.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you, Angela Columbus from Spotlight, PA.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Stephen Bloom, Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation and a former PA State Representative, and Bill DeWeese, former Speaker of the House. Bill, let's start with you. The House passed their version of the budget, $50.3 billion. How does this compare to the governor's original proposal from months ago?
Well, it's smaller, but it's, according to them, reasonable, and a lot of other people might think so. The GOP House and Senate teams are in the higher 40s, so those numbers are being modulated, but they're not extreme. And it would not be unusual for people to get in the room and figure this thing out. And I know this is a wild card, but I've watched Rahm Emanuel, who is contemplating running for president. If Pritzker doesn't run, there's some internecine excitement out in Chicago. But the way Rahm Emanuel would handle the aldermen would be the way Rendell would have handled the House and the Senate. And you bring him into the room, and nobody leaves until you pound out something. So from the high 50s, the low middle 50s.
50.3 is what the House wants.
And Governor Shapiro was moving up toward the middle 50s, and the Senate Republicans, understandably, were in the middle or higher 40s. But I just don't understand why they haven't been able to Rahm Emanuel this whole process.
Well, I'd say it's a good point. And I was through 8 cycles of budgets when I was a state representative, so I saw some of this up close and personal. In particular, the 2015 budget year, where Governor Wolf had proposed a huge spending increase and an outright tax increase to the tune of $4 billion. And so there was a massive impasse on that budget because the Republican-controlled legislative chambers were not willing to go ahead and accept that sort of a framework from Governor Wolf. But what Governor Wolf did was less like the Rahm Emanuel and more like the Governor Shapiro, which is seemingly just sort of stand on the sidelines and watch the legislative leaders from both chambers, and now they're split. The Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate. And he's, as governor, rather than getting that hands-on, we're going to get you guys all together and make something happen, he's kind of like, let me know when you have a plan. And that's not working well. We're almost 4 months now past the June 30th budget deadline. Not saying that it can't be resolved today, but it doesn't appear like it's going to be resolved today. There's not even that many session days left in the calendar year at this point.
In politics,
we're late October.
To supplement what Steve just said, if you're popular, and Governor Shapiro appears to be popular in Pennsylvania and outside of Pennsylvania, but if you're popular, you've got two options. Now, again, this is not inscribed in granite, but one is you can do what Steve just said and pull back and just wait to see how things go. The other is the Rahm Emanuel. You get in the room and you figure this thing out and you say, now, you want this and I want that, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it. But you do jeopardize some popularity in that number two. But it's either one or the other. And right now, we're not just weeks, we're months into this. And there are other 49 states that have decided to come up with a budget. And so I'm anxious for everybody to get back in the room and roll their sleeves up.
So as far as you can tell, gentlemen, whenever the caucuses do communicate and try to negotiate the budget, how has communication changed since you were in the legislature? Bill, you mentioned at least a couple times about people getting in the room and rolling up their sleeves. Does that still happen? And if it doesn't, what's the effect?
Well, Steve and I aren't in the room,
right?
But we know a lot of people that are. And I have an anecdote that I think is very palpable in this dialogue, and that is when COVID came, the little barber shop closed in the Capitol, right there at the back of the hall of the House. And from the 1970s and 80s and 90s and the early aughts, I'm an old fellow, but I was there for almost 3.5 decades, exceeding that. So many handshakes, so many deals, and back then, late night poker games because there was not an 11 o'clock cessation moment on the budget. So things got done, and the Speaker of the House might come in, and you had to go to the bathroom for the men's room through there. And I pleaded with leaders on both sides to no avail. Don't close the barbershop. Make it 1 week for men, 1 week for women. There's a way to do this. And just the collegiality of the modern legislature, not only in Washington, which is very, very tangible, that they're not playing golf together, they're not having dinner together, their children aren't in school together. This is a very, very different environment, and I think it augments some of the asperity in the public dialogue. So even when people do go in to those rooms, they don't know each other as well. I used to play golf with Bobby Jubileer, and he was the Republican Senate pro tem. And when we're rubbing elbows, I mean, those were the kinds of activities that engendered a more positive result. And I know that's just one anecdote, but I think it's very, very real.
And
Steve, how do you like that? The barbershop as a metaphor for communication.
It is a great metaphor. And in fact, I saw that happening many times when I was in the House, and we'd have to reach the facilities back there, you had to go right by the barber chair, and it was absolutely what you described. Members from both parties talking usually convivially, and
Most of the time.
almost a word worthy of the speaker. But in any case, I wanted to note that the outcome of that standoff with Governor Wolf in 2015 was that the budget was so late, it was well into the next year. I think it was March when the budget finally got done, and it was basically forced upon the governor, and he lost from that moment on his momentum forward of having legislative priorities that could be enacted. He would still raise a lot of his priorities, but at that point it appeared almost that he gave up on trying to get.
On a couple occasions, he didn't even sign the budget,
The big spending bills that he wanted, and the borrowing and the overspending and the deficits. He was just pushing for stuff that he was never able to get. Fortunately, and it left our Commonwealth's fiscal situation relatively solid. We were able to start rebuilding the rainy day fund, having a reasonable amount in the budget reserves, and now we're seeing in this budget cycle a governor who's hands off, but he has proposed spending about anywhere from $5 to $7 billion, depending on which particular proposal you're looking at. He's proposing to spend that, and there's a vast mismatch between the amount he wants to spend and the amount of revenue that the IFO, the Independent Fiscal Office, is saying that we have. $5 to $7 billion gap. And if that goes forward, it creates that structural deficit that will run dry the reserves, run dry the rainy day fund, and force ultimately a tax increase on Pennsylvanians on the order of about $1,600 per family of 4 each year.
Steve, did you have an independent fiscal office in your day when you were in the legislature?
Yes, we had the IFO. And
How about you, Bill?
Great
No,
resource.
it was an invention that came subsequently.
But really a great resource because they do quality work, they're bipartisan, and it's a voice that both sides of the aisle have to listen to. When the IFO says they've got numbers, their numbers are done professionally and well, and it gives everyone a pivot point to understand where we really are.
I agree with Steve on that. And he's right, to the best of my recollection, that March date was the latest in history, and I think the second latest was a Rendell budget that was in December. But I have one more reference that I think is even barbershop on steroids, and that is that the Honorable Governor Tom Corbett and then the Honorable Governor Tom Wolf decided to forego a tradition that had gone on for 32 consecutive years under Richard Thornburg and Robert Patrick Casey and Tom Ridge and Edward G. Rendell. And that was the legislative initiative grants that were pejoratively referred to by people like yourself, and I mean this with not love and respect, but affection and respect, as whams, the walking around money, which was just a way for the press to get at the politicians, which is okay. I mean, that's the way life has been in the United States for 250 years.
Here's money, it's at your discretion to spend it the way you want.
Legislative leaders, 2 or 3 or 4, the toppers and the Struzzies in the Republican caucus of the day, and our team with Dwight Evans and others, and Dick Tillman. I mean, these are honorable people. Tillman was awarded the Silver Star at Iwo Jima as a Marine, I might add. And he was the head of the Appropriations Committee for many, many years. But when you had 3 or 4 or 5 legislative leaders in the Republican caucus in the House and the same in the Democratic caucus, and you do that in the Senate, you were able to say to the rank and file person, we know that summer festival back in Bloomsburg needs another $20,000. And I mean, these were not extravagant. These were decimal points on the big budget. But you had the ability to navigate and negotiate as leaders. And Matt Bradford has few parallels, in my view, because he's had a very, very attenuated majority of 1. And he's been able to send 3 times a budget over to the Senate, and they haven't been able to react. And I might add, and then we can get into the numbers at your convenience, but I'm not so sure that the Republican Senate has every vote that they need. I served with my dear friend Senator Hutchinson, who was former Representative Hutchinson. He may be somewhat tentative or disinclined. I'm not sure whether the gentlelady from York, Ms. Kiefer, in the state Senate is inclined. And certainly, although I don't know Senator Mastriano, other than I had lunch with him once and we discussed the Civil War, and I find him to be amiable, I'm not so sure he's involved favorably. So if Senator Pittman and Senator Costa can come together, and again, there's no reason why Governor Shapiro could not reinstate some ability for state legislative leaders, the potentates in the House and the Senate, to come together with some projects. And I'm talking about $15,000, $20,000 here, $15,000, $20,000 there. Not the $5 million or the $3 million, but the navigation of those highways and byways of yesteryear's budget was really helped not only by the barbershop, but by the fact that House and Senate leaders had the ability to take legislative discretionary money and put it into those districts.
Well, let's consider then, let's just bring this right up to date as well as we can. The House has passed their own budget, as I pointed out, of $50.3 billion. So let's consider what Joe Pittman, Senate Majority Leader, has put on the record. What has he said to the public about the possibility of a budget being worked on soon?
Well, he continues to express expectation that a budget will be done soon. I don't know when that is, when soon is, but the Senate's in session this week, as they're probably about to gavel in an hour or so. I'm not sure what time the session starts today, but they were here yesterday. They're here today.
Is it safe to say they'll get into the budget right away?
I think they'll be doing some things related to the budget that are going to be important pieces of framework for what ultimate compromise can be reached. They'll be in session again next week, both the House and the Senate. So there's an opportunity for them to make progress. They'll all be in the same place, and maybe some of that getting in a room and getting things worked out can happen. There's probably about, I don't know, 10 or so points that are key in getting a budget done that have held things up in one way or another.
That sounds like quite a few to me, a layman.
There's a lot, right? And there's a lot, and it's a complex situation again because there's been such an intransigence, excuse me, at the top
And while you're taking a sip of your water, I've seen that word a few times, intransigence, about budget negotiation. It's been applied to budget negotiations.
It's a complex negotiation, but the key is that differential between the spend number that the governor wants and the House leadership wants versus the Senate standing up for the fiscal responsibility and making sure that Pennsylvanians aren't stuck with an unexpected tax hike after the next year.
We'll put it this way. Will Senate leaders try to push it into the 40s, as Bill, I believe, mentioned a few minutes ago? Would they favor a budget in the high 40s instead of anything 50 or more?
I think that's certainly been articulated, that the budget has to balance. It has to be a balance that the IFO can recognize and say that this is fiscally responsible. It won't thrust an unexpected tax increase on the hardworking taxpayers of Pennsylvania.
There's a prevailing commentary in the cafeteria in the Capitol complex, and naturally, I buy into a lot of that. It's such an unusual atmosphere in that building, but that after the governor's address on 4 February, it was not until the anniversary of the beginning of the Korean War on the 25th of June, from February 4 to 25 June, that there wasn't that room where they being the House and Senate leaders on both sides, all 4 caucuses and the governor, were in the room mixing it up. And I'm just telling you from my knowledge, and I was speaker under Casey and leader under Ridge and Rendell, the chief executives need to be in that room bringing people together. And again, I have high confidence in Matt Bradford and Jordan Harris and the team, Speaker McClinton in the House. I mean, these were not my colleagues. Matt was there at the commencement of his term and the finality of my involvement. But I have a wonderful relationship because of the social dynamics of my world with Joe Pittman. I think this can be done, but the fact that they weren't in that room banging away from February 4 to June 25 is a factor. That's a factor today.
Bill, a question for you, and I believe it dovetails into something Steve said earlier. Kim Ward, Senate President Pro Tem, said on a radio show that the budget impasse could end today if Senate Republicans let the governor and House Democrats have their tax increase.
Well, it could end maybe another way, and that is if the Senate could guarantee that Mastriano
doesn't
and Kiefer,
necessarily mean a tax increase, Bill. Let me put it that way. If
well,
Democrats
again, I would have to
way.
acquiesce to Steve's knowledge and his statements about the independent fiscal office. It would seem that additional revenue would be needed, but I'm not fiscally astute enough to give you a specific answer to that.
Well, here's the thing, piece for both of you, gentlemen. I understand Senators Pittman and Ward have made the point that the budget has ballooned 67% over the last 10 years. So what's driving this increase? 67% sounds like a whole lot to me, Steve.
Well, the driver is, as usual in Pennsylvania, the 2 main expenditures in the budget are for public welfare, so all the social welfare programs and so forth, and for education. Education funding has gone up consistently, regularly, significantly every one of those 10 years that you've talked about. It's a constant refrain that there needs to be more money for public education. At Commonwealth Foundation, we've argued along with that there should be opportunities for expanded school choice, because part of the problem with our education system is that money is just being thrown at it without an expectation of quality product, excellently well-prepared students.
Everyone expects accountability.
And that hasn't been there, but that's what's been driving those costs that you've talked about. Education spending has risen dramatically every year. public welfare spending has risen dramatically every year, in large part due to the Medicaid program and the way that works in tandem with the federal government as well. But that's where the generation of this perceived need to spend more and more and more is really fanned by those two big programs, education and public welfare.
How about you, Bill? 67% increase over 10 years.
I'm not a member of the Commonwealth Foundation. In fact, in the green room, we were discussing our multitude of differentiations. But in this case, I think Steve's correct. I don't think that I can add to what he just said relative to the amount of money being spent. Now, I would differ. I mean, cyber education, some of those testing scores are lamentable, and I'm not so sure that anybody up there has figured out, especially in the governor's office, quite frankly, because Governor Shapiro had a position as a young legislator on school choice and on public education. Then it was altered in the last campaign momentarily, and then it's been changed one last time. In fact, it's been changed to a position I'm not sure I can delineate. But that's a factor, and it's going to be a factor, and probably the preeminent factor in this whole dialogue.
It's been a sort of a symbolic depiction of the whole problem. The fact that the governor publicly stated that he was for certain school choice programs, that he would move that forward as governor, and then he line item vetoed it from the budget when it was passed by the House and the Senate. So that has left bad blood. That's left some frustration. I think that has hampered the ability of the Senate leaders and the House leaders to be willing to reach a compromise, because they still feel burned by the governor, and they're afraid that's going to happen again.
And it's not audacious to bring it right out here on the table that there are national aspirations that the governor maintains that are probably involved in this whole decision making.
Very interesting, gentlemen. I'm going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for here on PCN. On the issues on Wednesday, we'll have more candidates for you to meet in November's election. First, Kevin Dougherty, Democrat for retention on Pennsylvania's Supreme Court. He's at 7:30 p.m. Then Patrick Dugan, Democrat running for Philadelphia District Attorney at 8 p.m. And finally, Corey O'Connor, Democrat for Pittsburgh Mayor at 8:30 p.m. They're all here on Wednesday evening. A journalist roundtable will have Tisra Christopher from Penn Live, Jackson White from WITF, and Carmen Russell Slokansky from WHYY. They'll catch us up on news from Harrisburg Thursday at 7 p.m. Now on to the history and culture side of programming. Disability rights in Pennsylvania will be the subject on Tuesday at 8 p.m. here on PCN. The Amish Farm and House is the first tourist attraction in the U.S. to explore the Amish way of life. That'll be on Tuesday at 9 p.m. The Battle of Gettysburg is considered the turning point of the Civil War. Walk in the footsteps of Union and Confederate soldiers on Saturday, starting at 11 a.m. Go to PCNTV.com for scheduling details. Now on to sports. Football game of the week. Mount Carmel takes on Shamokin High School. Coverage courtesy of Mount Carmel High School TV. They'll kick off here Friday, live at 7 p.m. Then we'll have another game for you. Central York versus York. Coverage courtesy of High School Sports Live. That's on Saturday at 7 p.m. You can watch this show and all our public affairs programming free of charge by visiting PCNSelect.com. While you're there, you can download our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now, we're discussing the budget impasse here in Pennsylvania with our guests. And gentlemen, up to this point, we've been talking about the budget in fairly general, even abstract terms. Now let's try to get into the nitty-gritty and consider the consequences of this late budget. As Steve Bloom pointed out, it's almost 4 months overdue. So let's talk about the impact on schools. I understand they've missed out on $3 billion in payments. And just how substantial a sum is that, Steve?
Well, this public schools in Pennsylvania are legally allowed to generate reserve funds, and so they are to keep reserve funds. So most school districts have an ample reserve that they can utilize for the situation like this, especially Many of the schools that are in the more economically independent areas that are doing well financially, they aren't really affected. They can tap into the reserves if they need it, and they know that ultimately they'll be backfilled. So there's it's just a temporary problem of bridging that period between. There are school districts, though, especially many of them serving students with lower incomes and less advantages in life, and they don't have those resources, those particular.
I heard some schools might shut down sports.
And
that would be a blow to morale.
That could be. And I think sometimes when there's a budget impasse at any level of government, there's some showmanship. They pick some of the things that people love the best to highlight as we're going to close that down, just for the sake of making an argument point.
Understood.
I hate to see that. But again, some of these districts could in fact be strained under the delay. But in the meanwhile, ultimately they'll get their money. So that there's no question about that. It's a matter of timing when a budget is eventually reached, which it's we're going to see that at some point.
Are there operations changed in any way right now? Bill, I mean, I know you're not on the school board, but.
No, I'm not, and I don't have a good answer other than there is, even at the national level, the federal administration's threatening to shut down this or that to hurt this entity or that entity. And as Steve said, at the state level or the federal level, that's too bad. We don't need the showmanship. We need the budget. And again, with the Governor Wolf moment in March of several years ago and the Rendell moment in December, even farther back, this should not be happening. And people need to get in the room and navigate and negotiate.
And there are other programs like at the county level, for example, where there are county programs that are funded by Pennsylvania state funding. And so those programs are going to be experiencing some strain. There's no doubt about that. Treasurer Stacey Garrity has offered a concept to provide for essentially bridge loans for those kind of entities that need it.
This is the loan program we heard about.
Right, and the legislative chambers were planning on looking at if they could waive any interest provisions so that there's no interest loss in the whole process, that it all be taken care of again. So when everything is resolved, there's not going to be a lingering effect. But ultimately, we're not like Washington, D.C., in that in Pennsylvania, the courts decided many, many years ago that state employees get paid during a budget standoff. So state employees and legislators are getting their normal payments, and the government moves forward. It doesn't have the crippling effect that an actual stoppage of pay for all those workers would have, and we're seeing some of that on the national level with what's happening in D.C.
And a couple people in the General Assembly have posited the idea that legislators would not get paid. Well, the end result of that would be, if you took it to the farthest example, that only the wealthy legislators would be in good shape and the people of more modest incomes would not be. So I'm really dubious about the idea of legislators not being paid. What we need to do is what I've said so far, and that's come together.
Well, let's continue to consider Treasurer Garrity's program that would involve loaning money to counties. And the last time anybody checked, a couple weeks ago, only 6 counties. How many counties? 67. 67 in Pennsylvania. And at that time, only 6 counties had shown interest in borrowing this money. And I wonder if either of you can use any kind of insight to tell me why there seems to be a low level of interest in this program. Again, last time anybody checked.
Yeah, I think they're prepared for this sort of eventuality, and as long as it doesn't go too long, they're okay. That's the bottom line. It does not have that crippling impact on government that a federal shutdown
And the
might
smaller
have.
the government, the more inclined they are to dot the I and cross a T and work things out. If you're in a township or a borough or a county, there's not much that's going to be overlooked. In a bigger apparatus like the Commonwealth or the federal government, it's not so easy. But if you're in Jefferson Township in Greene County, PA, and Ricky DeKavic, the township supervisor, is sitting there with his other 2 compatriots, I mean, every nickel is accounted for. They know, as Steve just suggested, they've probably have reserve funds set aside for a state problem like this one, but that doesn't inure to the benefit of the negotiations going on right now, because the Commonwealth, and as you have closely and appropriately illuminated, has an education problem on the horizon. And again, once again, Steve's comment that the areas where folks are of more marginal incomes in these hundreds of school districts, and most of them rural. I mean, of course, you have the big Pittsburgh and Philadelphia districts, but so many of these poorer districts are located in rural settings. In Pennsylvania, they are going to be impacted very, very negatively. And I think the more weeks that go by, the more palpable that change will be.
Now, one more question about Treasurer Garrity's program. And again, the basics are it involves $500 million, an interest rate possibly of 4.5%. That was proposed. But there are two issues here. The interest rate may be waived. That's one issue. The second issue is one that Minority Leader Jay Costa brought up. He says the treasurer doesn't have the authority to loan money during a budget impasse anyway. Steve, what do you think of this?
Well, I'm sure that Treasurer Garrity's team figured out what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do under existing statute. I don't think they blundered into doing something that they know can't be done. But the issue about the interest is one that the legislature has taken interest in, because they do want, if this loan program is going to be in effect, they don't want there to be an additional cost, that 4.5% or whatever it would be on interest that's of the money loan. We want to make it a...
To use Steve's wonderful verb, I don't think that Leader Costa and his legal team have blundered into this, so it might end up in Commonwealth Court. Now, I'm not taking sides because I'm not astute enough to know which side is right. And I think Steve and I are both bereft of legal training. You know, we didn't go to law school. Are you an attorney? I apologize. You're such a soft-spoken guy. I served in a different capacity.
No, we were in simultaneous service, though. Absolutely.
You're beginning in my conclusion.
For at least one full term.
But no matter.
See, you can learn a lot on this show.
Yes,
Bill.
we do. Well, I've always liked him in spite of the fact that we didn't agree on much.
Well, let's go on to. It's hard to think about Pennsylvania's budget impasse and not think about the simultaneous federal government shutdown. So the confluence of these two situations, what does it mean then to spending in general? Can you hazard a guess, Bill?
No, I really can't. How do you like that for an honest answer?
No.
Except for the fact that it's devastating, and I think it's without precedent that both were happening at the same time. So Pennsylvania's
That's
residents...
why I pointed out, because I've never noticed it before. Now, there was a shutdown before during the first Trump presidency, remember?
No, I'm only saying, was it simultaneous with a state
that's unheard of.
impasse?
Yes.
I'm only speculating.
There are only two states. I mean, Pennsylvania and then North Carolina has a different kind of a system, so their budget is not necessarily officially done. But we're the only two outliers of the 50 states that don't have our budgets done by this time.
I talked to Senator Pittman last night, obliquely in a social setting, and I think he did say that it was what you just said, but I think that there are 49 states that have concluded. And again, I'm not sure about North Carolina.
It's interesting to consider that during the federal budget shutdown, some congressmen are waiving their paychecks. And at least, I think there's at least a couple from Pennsylvania. I wonder if that well-publicized effort can have an effect on state lawmakers. Do you think anyone will say, hold my paycheck until the budget is settled?
Yeah, that it bothers me that they're trying to essentially strong-arm members into voting by withholding their pay. That idea, because we want legislators who are able and willing to stand up against the powerful forces that exist in Harrisburg. Like we saw again in the 2014-15 cycle, those legislative bodies stood up to the governor, and ultimately they won the battle, and that win saved Pennsylvanians billions and billions of dollars in taxes that otherwise would have been on the table. So it's important that our lawmakers feel like they have whatever resources the taxpayers see fit that they should get in their salary, but that they should be able to at least have that when they're arguing these big issues that sometimes require people to just stand off and to be able to hold on against time and all the other forces in order to win the thing. We want to win here for the taxpayers. I don't think it helps to punish the lawmakers for taking a bold stand.
Well, I'm also suggesting the possibility that a lawmaker come forward and say, my principles call for you to withhold my salary. So
yeah, individually, if they want to do that, by all means, they should. But I hate to see the idea that they're going to be punished for having an impasse.
That's another thing, I think.
And I never saw, and I heard this many times over many years, I'm not going to take my salary, but they always took it at the end. Never once did I see somebody didn't take it ad infinitum into the future.
Eventually it came back.
Yes.
Another reflection on Treasurer Garrity's program that is supposed to loan money to the counties. I mean, since she's running for governor, she's running against Josh Shapiro next year, put on kind of your political consultant hats.
I
here
think
and tell
Josh
me,
will win the primary, the Democratic primary.
well, let's not jump ahead to that yet. So what might this do for her campaign for governor? And as Bill pointed out earlier, Josh Shapiro is undeniably popular among Pennsylvanians, and the polls reflect that.
Yeah, Commonwealth Foundation does not get involved in elections, so I'd like to stay away from that topic in terms of making sure that we're within our
Understood.
501c3 requirements for.
How about you, Bill? Will you take the plunge?
I'm sorry, which plunge? I can't take any Commonwealth Foundation plunge. But
Well, as far as the significance of Treasurer Garrity offering this program for the counties, the millions of dollars of loans,
Well,
and the fact that she's running for governor.
it's certainly astute for her.
Is it a political campaign plank, I guess, is more to the point, Bill.
Well, I would like to think that she's motivated by wholesome reasons of trying to solve the fiscal impasse that we have in the state right now. I'm certainly not going to allege any political motivation. I think if she were not running, she would be doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting close to the end of our program, gentlemen, so let's consider what the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote about the budget impasse. They wrote, the concept that 253 elected lawmakers and a governor cannot create a budget even 15 weeks after the deadline is rankling. What about that choice of words? Bill, you like words.
I
Is
do.
rankling right?
Yes. I don't think I could come up with a better one. I'm full of consternation also.
That'll do.
I'm vexed. And again, I think, and whether I'm right or wrong, it's worth putting out there. I think Ed Rendell, Rahm Emanuel, Tom Ridge, Dick Thornburg, I just think this could have been done if you got in the room. And I want to say one more time, from 4 February to June 25, they weren't in the room, according to what I'm hearing in the cafeteria from a lot of different people. You cannot put that off all that long. You've got to be in Pennsylvania. You've got to be in the room. And I'm not so sure that's the case right now.
And I would commend those lawmakers who are willing to take a risk by standing and standing to protect the taxpayers as the impasse goes forward. That's certainly commendable. At the same time, I'm hoping that they and their colleagues will ultimately be able to reach a compromise, and I think part of that is waiting the other out. And we're going to see how it goes. And those who waited out that 2014-15 scenario with Governor Wolf and the impact that had, I think it can encourage them to, as necessary, prolong the impasse if needed, to make sure that ultimately taxpayers are protected from unnecessary tax hikes.
This should be a bipartisan conclusion. And we were able to do it in 1991. We raised taxes in 1991 under Governor Casey with 92 Democrats and 10 Republicans. And again, if I'm Matt Bradford, and I'm sure he's thinking this, I shouldn't say I'm sure he's thinking this, but I'm highly confident that he is. He's looking at that Republican Senate setting over there. And again, this is extreme, but I really think Rahm Emanuel's not my hero. Roberto Clementi's my hero. But anyway, if Rahm Emanuel was in that room, I think he'd figure out a way to make a deal with Senator Mastriano. Now, how do you like that for an extravagant commentary? But you've got
Get a third party in there, you say.
Well, I was just thinking if Rahm were the governor right now, the way he worked as the mayor of Chicago, because that's a really higgledy-piggledy, harem-scarum group out there of aldermen, and he was able to do it. And I think Governor Shapiro's got to figure out a way to bring him in. And I also think that the spotlight should be shined on the Republican Senate to see how many votes they have for their own compromise in the high 40s. Will Hutchinson and Mastriano and Kiefer, I mean, will they be inclined to help out? I don't know.
Well, as the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette pointed out, we have 253 elected lawmakers. Do you think the size of our legislature has an effect on this process? I mean, the bigger the ship, the slower it turns around.
Well, excuse me for jumping in, but if you reduce the size of the legislature, you know who gets the most boon out of that? It's the governor and the cabinet. And number two, the lobbyists. You reduce the size of the legislature, just cut it in half. And so a state rep, instead of having 60,000 people, now they have 120,000 people. Fewer people are going to get to see the person at the county fair, fewer because there are going to be more county fairs to attend. Fewer people are going to have their phone calls returned like this by the state House or Senate member. And so really, when you want to reduce the size of the legislature, one, two, the governor becomes more powerful and his cabinet. And number two, the lobbyists become more powerful. They don't have to go see 203 people. They only have to see half of that. So I am vehemently opposed to a reduction in the size of the legislature. We're the fifth largest state. We have the second largest legislature. I don't think it's out of kilter.
And I've never seen any sort of study purporting to show that a slightly larger or smaller body of lawmakers actually creates better policy for that state. I think it's within reason. It's an arbitrary number. It's picked for convenience and for purposes of attaining adequate representation for folks from all over the state. But there's no particular magic in the 253.
I concur.
We only have about 2 minutes left in our program, gentlemen. So let's try to, I don't know, I guess you could call it predict the future a little bit. In other words, how do you think these budget negotiations are going to occur in the coming weeks? And is there any end in sight? I'm not going to hold you to it, of course.
On a personal basis, having again been close to the process a number of times and seen how it affects folks across the state, it's going to end.
Well, that we know, Steve.
They're going to, and I'm going to just boldly pick that it's going to happen before.
Your bold pick is that it will end
before November.
Oh, okay, all right. That's what I want to hear. Bill, what do you think of that?
I'm not so audacious. I'm going to say before Christmas. But I think, again, Governor Shapiro is a individual with national aspirations and a pretty darn favorable Pennsylvania public polling dynamic. And I think it inures to his benefit and obviously to the Commonwealth's benefit to get this thing done. So I'm hopeful that they will get in the room.
Last question. Should the governor be more involved in negotiations at this point? It seems for the most part he's quiet. He's letting the caucuses fight it out.
Absolutely. And I think we've both made that point today that the governor needs to be involved. He needs to insert himself as the executive in the state. He has to play that role as a balance between the Democratic House and the Republican Senate.
But he already made his proposal. What else is there to say?
Well, by sheer force,
he's got to sell it. He's got to advocate for it. He's got to get out there and use the bully pulpit for what it's designed to do.
No better term than bully pulpit, and not in the negative sense of bully, but in the Theodore Roosevelt sense of good. And if you could only think about Ed Rendell in his prime, and he was roly-poly, the big Ed Rendell in that room with House and Senate leaders on both sides, and he pounded away a la Rahm Emanuel. Last time I'm going to mention his name. But you have to have that ingredient.
All right, our guests have been Stephen Bloom, Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation, and Bill DeWeese, former Speaker of the PA House. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
PCN's for being here.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
PCN's Ellen Franz talked to Representative Rick Krajewski about academic freedom and federal funding legislation.
Welcome to our program. You are co-sponsoring a bill titled Protect Pennsylvania's Academic Freedom Act. What would this bill do?
Yes, so this bill is in response to the federal compact offers we've seen the Trump administration offered to 9 universities, including University of Pennsylvania, which is my alma mater. And essentially, these compacts are, they're structured as offers where, in exchange for some pretty extreme restrictions and stipulations around admission practices, around curriculum on campus, around a variety of cultural controls on university campuses, in exchange for putting in these restrictions or regulations, universities could receive some amount of federal funding. This, to me, is a pretty egregious example of political intervention on campuses' culture, their ability to set their own academic standards, to set their own admission standards, to be able to have their ability and willingness to use DEI policies to address structural inequities. And this is Trump and his administration is attempting to intervene in those abilities and those protections. And so myself and Representative Kenyatta felt it was important to provide a counter response and to make it clear that as state legislators, as people who respect academic independence and freedom, that we weren't going to allow Trump and his cronies to basically force their agenda down our universities' campuses. So.
Now, what impact would this compact, if signed, have on students?
Yeah, so it would restrict the kinds of curriculums we can expect on campus. And of course, based on past precedent, we know that this will particularly be impacting issues like gender studies, race history, history of race relations, anything in kind of sociological departments that they feel would threaten their ability to enforce their kind of white supremacist logic. Any of those kind of curriculums could be at risk of being removed completely from campuses. In addition, they have put in language around admission stipulations, things that, like after myself, I was able to attend the University of Pennsylvania because as a working class Black student, Penn understood that having those kind of marginalized voices at an institution like Penn was important. With these kinds of regulations and stipulations coming from this compact, students like myself may not have the opportunity to go to a university like Penn. So this has some pretty extreme consequences, both in terms of academic curriculum, but also the ability for marginalized voices and people who are not given access to academic privilege. This threatens their ability to be able to be in places like Penn and other universities and really dismantles attempts to level that playing field.
Now, in an opinion piece for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Penn professor Jonathan Zimmerman wrote in regards to your bill that you, quote, can't fight political interference by proposing new forms of it, and that's precisely what the legislators are doing, end quote. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I read the opinion piece, and while I respect his opinion, frankly, the claim that Penn hasn't been operating politically in itself, already the argument kind of falls apart. And this has been reported, but the chair of the board of advisors for the Wharton School on campus is actually one of the people who was an architect for the language of this federal compact offer. So when you already have a crisis that's been brought on by political intervention, the expectation and that leads to honestly the university being compromised because this person serves in a leadership position at one of the universities being offered this compact. In a situation like that, I, as a public official, as someone who represents Penn and Penn is in my district, engaging with my constituents, engaging with my neighborhood, the idea that we're supposed to just step back and let the dilemma play out itself is just a little naive and irresponsible. It would be irresponsible for me to stand back and to not get involved when a major employer and major academic university in my community is at risk of drastically changing the way it relates to my community and to my city and to its employers. So I felt compelled to take action.
Have you heard any feedback on this bill from students at places like Penn?
Yeah, we've already circulated it to some other professors and academic institutions, academic organizations. We're getting feedback as we speak, but people I think are pretty excited to see that we're willing to step up. Frankly, this is an attempt at intimidation. It's an attempt at extortion. And so we need to make it clear that this is not acceptable. And we're going to do what we can. We want Penn to do the right thing. We want all the universities listed to do the right thing. But we also know that part of doing the right thing is holding them accountable to doing the right thing. And I think there are a lot of people watching who are excited to see some of our political leaders demonstrate some leadership.
Lastly, where is this bill in the legislative process currently?
So we are still drafting the language. We have a co-sponsorship memo out. We haven't introduced the bill yet, but we plan to shortly because we know we're on a tight timeline in regards to getting feedback to the compact and then, an official decision by the universities listed. So our goal is to introduce the bill imminently.
Representative Rick Krajewski, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Let me leave you with this reminder about On the Issues. We'll have more candidates in November's general election for you to meet on Wednesday. First, Kevin Dougherty, Democrat for retention on Pennsylvania's Supreme Court at 7:30 p.m. Then Patrick Dugan, Democrat running for Philadelphia District Attorney at 8 p.m. And finally, Corey O'Connor, Democrat for Pittsburgh Mayor at 8:30 p.m. They're all here on Wednesday evening. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.